You know the story, right? It's one of the most famous tales from World War II. August 1944, Hitler screams, "Burn Paris," and one good German general says, "No way," saving the City of Light. It's the perfect story of defiance, of humanity winning out. But what if it's not true? What if the real story is something else entirely? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the archives, because they tell a very different tale. Turns out, Hitler's real doomsday plan? Well, it wasn't for Paris. It was something way bigger, way more secret, and made of solid concrete.
So let's set the scene. Here's the infamous order, coming straight from the Führer's headquarters. And let me tell you, it's absolute, it's chilling, there's no misunderstanding it. You see, for Hitler, losing Paris wasn't just about losing a battle. No, it was this huge symbolic defeat. It was like surrendering France to the entire world. So this order? It wasn't just military strategy. It was a full-on destructive tantrum from a guy who knew he was losing. The message was simple. If I can't have Paris, nobody can.
And this is where our supposed hero enters the picture. General Dietrich von Schultitz, the German military governor of Paris. Now, the legend, a legend he was more than happy to help create in his own memoirs, by the way, is that he gets this monstrous order, looks around at the beauty of Paris, and just refuses. He's the guy who single-handedly saved Notre Dame, the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower, the whole shebang. I mean, it's a story we've seen in books and huge Hollywood movies for decades.
But doesn't that story just feel a little too perfect, you know? What if the city was saved not by one man's sudden crisis of conscience, but by just cold, hard military reality? And what if, while everyone's been focused on this Paris story, we've been completely missing Hitler's real destructive obsession? The evidence, you guys, it points to a totally different doomsday plan, a plan of concrete and steel, aimed not at wiping out culture, but at unleashing terror on an industrial scale.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself, the guy at the heart of this whole myth. Was General von Schultitz really the savior of Paris? Well, to figure that out, we've got to look past the story he told about himself and see who this officer really was.
So, in his own book, Schultitz claims that, yeah, the preparations were all set, they were ready to blow everything up at a moment's notice. See what he's doing here? He's carefully crafting this image of himself as the lone man with his finger on the big red button, the only thing standing between Paris and total annihilation, and he's the hero who chose not to push it.
Yeah, but then you look at his actual service record, and it tells a totally different story. This was no secret art-loving humanist. He was a ruthless, dyed-in-the-wool career officer. This is the guy who leveled the center of Rotterdam after the Dutch had already surrendered. He oversaw the brutal siege of Sevastopol, which killed tens of thousands of civilians. You know why Hitler trusted him? Because he was one of the few generals who wasn't involved in the plot to kill him. And get this, captured private conversations show he absolutely hated France and the French. I mean, come on, this is not the resume of a guy who's suddenly going to grow a conscience and disobey a direct order from his Führer.
Okay, so if Schultitz wasn't the secret hero, what actually happened? Let's get into the archives and watch how this whole beautiful legend just completely falls apart.
All right, here's the heart of it. The legend says it was one man's conscience. The reality? The people of Paris saved their own city. Starting on August 19th, the French resistance and regular citizens just rose up, launching a full-scale citywide rebellion. They threw up over 600 barricades in the streets. This made it physically impossible for German demolition teams to even get around, let alone wire the city to blow. The simple truth is, Schultitz didn't have the manpower, he didn't have the explosives, and he sure as hell didn't have the time to turn Paris into a pile of rubble.
And we know this isn't just speculation. Bomb disposal reports filed right after the liberation confirm it. Sure, some places were mined, absolutely, but they were all strategic targets. We're talking power stations, key bridges, stuff you'd hit to slow down an advancing army. But the big cultural icons, the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, the reports are crystal clear. There were never any explosives placed. The goal was to cripple the city, not to wipe its soul off the map.
And if you're looking for the smoking gun, well, this is it. It's a transcript of an intercepted phone call between von Schultitz and his high command. And what's he saying? He's not saying, "I refuse this immoral order." No. He's saying, "I can't carry out the order." In fact, he's begging for more tanks, more artillery, so he can get the job done. This isn't a man being defiant. This is a general on the ground telling his bosses he just doesn't have the resources to follow his orders. The will was there, folks. The means, not so much.
Which brings us right back to that big question. If turning Paris into rubble wasn't actually the Nazis' top priority, then what was? Well, the answer isn't in Paris at all.
It's hidden out in the French countryside, inside these absolutely massive, monstrous concrete structures that were built for something far, far more terrifying. To really get what these places were, you need to know one German term: Sonderbaustacke. Now, this wasn't your standard bunker building. This was an extreme classification, a special fortification standard that was saved only for Hitler's most important, top priority projects. And what were those? The launch sites for his vengeance weapons. Basically, if something was built to this standard, it was screaming, "This is the most important thing we're doing."
I mean, just look at the difference here. A regular, heavy-duty bunker on the Atlantic Wall, it might have a concrete roof that's, 3.5 meters thick. Pretty tough. But these V-weapon sites, built to that Sonderbaustacke standard, we're talking a roof of solid, reinforced concrete 5 meters thick. The insane amount of resources, concrete, steel, and slave labor that they poured into these places tells you everything you need to know about where Hitler's real doomsday priorities were.
55,000 tons. Just let that sink in. That's how much the concrete dome at just one of these sites, La Coupole, weighed. And under that massive dome, a 7-kilometer-long network of tunnels. It was basically an underground factory designed for one purpose: to store, fuel, and launch V-2 rockets at London, completely protected from any bomb the Allies could drop. This wasn't a bunker. It was a secret, subterranean military city.
And this is what all that concrete was for. The goal was pure industrial-scale terror. The V-2 sites like La Coupole, they were designed to launch up to 36 ballistic missiles every single day. And the V-3 super cannon, its goal was to fire 600 high-explosive shells an hour at London. This was Hitler's real doomsday plan. Forget Paris, it was a relentless, high-tech, long-range assault on England.
But wait, here's the final crazy twist in the story. Even after Paris was liberated, even after von Scholtitz was a prisoner of war, Hitler's obsession with destroying the city didn't stop. He actually tried 3 more times to wipe it out, using the very V-weapons those giant concrete bunkers were built to launch.
The timeline is just unbelievable when you look at it. On the exact same day that General de Gaulle is leading a victory parade down the Champs-Élysées, Hitler is ordering V-1 flying bombs to be aimed at Paris. That very night, the German Air Force bombs the city, killing 200 civilians. And then, on September 8th, the first V-2 ballistic missile ever used in warfare is launched, and its target is Paris. The threat was absolutely real, long after the so-called savior was out of the picture.
So why did the V-2 attacks on Paris eventually stop? Was it a change of heart? Nope. An official order from the German High Command spells it out. The attacks were stopped for political reasons. Basically, they figured bombing London had a bigger psychological impact, and the port of Antwerp was a more important military target for slowing the Allied advance. In the end, Paris was spared by a cold, brutal, logistical calculation. It had nothing to do with mercy.
So if the evidence is so clear-cut, why do we all still know the story of the good German general who saved Paris? How has this myth lasted for over 70 years? Well, the answer has nothing to do with what happened in 1944 and everything to do with politics after the war. The truth is, the story was just too useful for anyone to question it. Think about it. The Cold War is kicking off, and the Allies suddenly need West Germany as a partner against the Soviet Union. A story about a noble German general defying Hitler? That makes the whole partnership go down a lot smoother. It helps soften Germany's image. And for France, it gave them a simple, heroic narrative instead of a messy, complicated liberation. And then, of course, pop culture sealed the deal. The blockbuster book and movie, Is Paris Burning?, treated the legend as historical fact, and from that point on, it was set in stone for generations.
So in the end, the real story is so much more complex and, frankly, more interesting than the legend. The survival of Paris isn't a fairy tale about one man's conscience. It's a gritty story about a city's people rising up to save themselves, and a dictator whose truly apocalyptic vision had nothing to do with Paris and everything to do with concrete bunkers and terror weapons. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How many other great stories from history that we all take for granted were really just written to make the present a little more comfortable?